Hello and welcome back to the Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day, CEO of 𝐥𝐢𝐤 Recruitment Group. And right now there is so much noise on the internet, it can be really hard to be heard. And they say the quieter we are, the more we hear. So when you ought to take a moment, sit back, relax and listen, because today I am joined by Chief Product Officer at Immedis, Richard Limpkin. Now, Richard is focused on improving the efficiency of the global payroll process for clients worldwide across 150 countries. Now, being at the cutting edge of global payroll tech, I've been really excited to get Richard on the show because he's going to talk to us today all about touchless payroll. It's a new concept to me. It's something I'm really excited to hear about. So, Richard, welcome to the Listening Lounge. How are you doing?
Hey, Nick. Thanks ever so much for having me into the Listening Lounge. Looking forward to this.
So let's talk then about touchless payroll. I want to get straight into it. I think it's going to be quite a big subject area. Obviously, I've seen as a recruiter in this payroll space, the growth of Immedis and its brand, it's been stratospheric in terms of where I knew you several years ago to where you are now. And I know that touchless payroll is something that you're really passionate about. So tell me a little bit more about the concept of touchless payroll and what it actually means in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the first starting point, Nick, is I guess trying to differentiate between what we would consider to be domestic payroll and global. Like, domestic is really well on the journey to being touchless. We kind of, in most situations now, you see things input through a HR business process or through workforce management and flow seamlessly into payroll calculation, all the way through to payslip and payment execution. That challenge at a global scale is entirely different. The technical landscape, the operational landscape across jurisdictions is so much more complex and sophisticated in every facet that actually solving and getting to that same level of simplicity at a global scale is just a different beast. So being able to provide that same level of quality of service and certainty and execution around global payroll that you would see in a very standard domestic payroll, that's what it's really about. How do you get from something going in to being in somebody's account with no intervention, no human intervention? That's really what touchless is. And the biggest driver in that is time. It's giving people in payroll time back to do value add.
It's one of those things, though, where we've seen a lot in the news. We've seen BBC studies. Actually, I think it was a Deloitte study that BBC actually published many moons ago about automation and the fear of automation coming in. We talk a lot about RPA, or for those not familiar, robotic process automation. And it's something that I've discussed with quite a few guests on the show as well. There is some fear around automation and a touchless payroll service, particularly if you work in payroll. So tell me how you're using RPA. How is it being used in global payroll?
Yeah, I guess probably the key thing is just setting the scene of the landscape a little bit. And you're absolutely right. Like anything that is maybe not as well understood can instill a little bit of fear, and that's a big part of any change journey for an organization. But really, like, I see these things in as simpler form as possible. And like, I know on your own website, Nick, you've got Einstein on the front of it, but Einstein was the guy who coined the phrase very much so that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. And that's really a big piece of understanding what RPA is and what artificial intelligence is and how it can be applied. They're kind of two separate things. And if you take RPA in isolation, it's really just using tools to make things go a little bit faster and more efficient. And like the simplest form of an RPA could just be an Excel macro. Sure. It doesn't mean you're not still executing something in Excel. It doesn't mean the same outcomes don't occur, but it does mean you don't have to do a whole load of manual stuff in the middle, which may or may not be repeated correctly by somebody doing it. But also, is there any value in the person doing it? Does that person actually want to be doing that thing, or do they actually get distracted by it and not get to what they need to? So that's really what RPA is about. It's about applying tooling, in most cases, some kind of robotic automation to take away the manual tasks, to basically automate a process. RPA is all about automating a process, whereas AI is very much focused about using data. And they're two separate things, but really, particularly in payroll and especially in global payroll, it's the combination of both that becomes really important. You can automate a manual process, but the system will only go as fast as an already broken manual process. And what we're really focusing on is, how do you eliminate that manual process? How do you really go to a true root cause and actually re-engineer the whole architecture of global payroll to not have to automate bad stuff?
What are some of the examples of, where you've gone in, you've been able to introduce some RPA processes, if that's the right word, and you've changed the way that it's currently working to improve efficiency? Are there some examples of where you're utilizing that and what some of the things you're doing with clients at the moment?
Yeah, we see it all the time, Nick, with particularly with new business customers, where there's been a huge, like you've talked already before about the automation that's happened in the HCM space, and especially again at a global stage with tier one HCM providers. That's really provided the foundation of good input into payroll. And what that's allowed us to do is, rather than automating that kind of classic payroll model in global, where you're extracting information and reports and populating change templates and passing those across into a process, which is typically where you might apply RPA to make that piece go a little bit quicker, to actually be able to reach into the upstream systems and actually synchronize systems, rather than taking something out, passing it across, automating it in, actually reaching out and pulling in real time what's actually required with surgical precision down to data field level. What do we actually need to know specific to the country, specific to the person and their circumstance, to actually get the full picture of this person from multiple sources? It could be the HCM platform, it could be time management. Quite often at global stage, it's benefits provision as well. And to actually get that consolidated single picture without the clunky moving parts. And that's where we've been able to hugely help organizations with that. Quite often at the onboarding stage of new joiners, where there's a lot of information required that's really legislative specific for that jurisdiction. And to actually make that simple, to turn it into something that's not complex for the payroll administrator in the customer organization, so that they don't have to be the expert in each country, but to actually provide them with a completely seamless and consistent global payroll process, even though, you know, as you know yourself, underneath the different components are very different depending on what country you're dealing with.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting from a recruitment perspective, we're seeing, particularly post-pandemic and post-COVID, the companies have been much more open now in the new virtual way of doing things to taking talent from places they'd never considered before. You know, we're no longer confined to the business culture of a single, office location in London. Actually, if I need the right talent with the right skills, I can look further afield, not just in the UK, but globally. So with that in mind, from a recruitment perspective, and we've seen huge shifts, are you then for anticipating that there can be a lot more clients now needing global payroll because of the new way of working post-COVID, because they are going to start halving talent from further reaching fields? And are there any particular implications the clients need to consider before they suddenly jump on and go, actually, Nick, we'll take someone from this location or this location as long as they've got the skills?
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff around that, Nick. It's probably one of the most dynamic areas of global payroll. But certainly the first thing is that barriers to recruiting have absolutely gone down in that context. And we've seen that ourselves within Immedis, and where we're able to deploy people and how you can build teams. I think what's really happened is something that would have happened naturally anyway, but it's been brought forward by at least 5 years. So this isn't a forced evolution. It's just something that's been accelerated. In terms of jurisdictions and barriers to people moving across countries, like take a simple example like Luxembourg, something like over half the working population of Luxembourg commute in each day from one of 4 other countries.
Wow, I didn't know that.
You know, those types of things you have to think about, and even simple things like the employee has to have a bank account in the country in which they work. Well, that's not true there. So why should that be true anywhere else? So having the flexibility to not have those constraints in the global model is kind of one of the things we've architected from the ground up. And that's going to be really important in future. There'll always be the legislative constraints. Like in India, the specific constraints around having to have a director in country to be able to have direct employees. Like those types of things will need to be carefully considered. It's not as simple as just dropping in and hiring somebody in the jurisdiction, but having an organization that can help you with that as you continue to grow is really important.
If you had the power of foresight, or you could change the entire payroll industry with one action or improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
Wow. I get one wish on this one.
One wish.
Wow. I would definitely drive for adoption of technology in both payroll, but in the supporting processes as well. And just look, I would love to see more and more organizations looking at the end-to-end process, from everything from applicant tracking right through to onboarding, right through to end of career with an organization, and looking at that way more holistically, and looking at how the different sections of that fit together. That to me is probably the single biggest thing that can make a market shift in how payroll operates, and in the lives of people operating in payroll, but the people who are affected by it, which is basically everyone employed.
Thank you everyone for joining me again on the Listening Lounge. Remember, every good conversation starts with good listening. I look forward to welcoming you all to the next episode real soon. Thanks, Richard.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Nick.